Hello, my name is Aaron Judy, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the life of Neil Armstrong. We'll look at the background on the space race, his life and career, Apollo 11, some of his post-NASA life, the impacts this has had on society, education, and research, Christian impacts, and then we will close. Historical science and innovation, starting with the Bible, has many stories of innovative projects and God using his people to build large things. The book of Nehemiah, chapter 3, is a good example of building the wall. As we've learned in this course, innovation really started in Western civilizations with Rome, building the bridges and road systems and waterways. Early innovators were mainly merchants and labor workers. They weren't seen as upper class people. Advancing science was put into a non-Judeo-Christian category, really seen from the Christian church and early Catholicism as a pagan way of life or thinking. The Protestant Reformation really changed this for science and innovation. We saw this in a couple of modules prior to this week, and I researched on Johannes Kepler, which produced the Kepler law. The Industrial Revolution really saw the biggest breakthroughs that really brought about NASA, ultimately bringing the jet engine, assembly lines, mass manufacturing, computers, and microprocessors into existence. NASA and the space race. The Soviet Union, USSR, formerly now known as Russia, was way ahead in space exploration compared to the United States in the early 1950s. Once World War II was over, the U.S. really went into a peacetime era that we pulled back, really bogged down both by the loss of blood and treasure in the aftermath of World War II. However, the rest of the world did not. They continued to militarize, build up their military infrastructure, and really afraid of the United States' power and our invention of the atomic bomb. On October 4th, 1957, Sputnik was launched by the Soviet Union, orbiting around the Earth and changing the world. Armstrong was quoted as saying, "It did change our world. It absolutely changed our country's view of what was happening, the potential of space." This certainly helped usher in the Cold War and the U.S.'s concern that space could possibly be militarized by the Soviet Union. In 1961, John F. Kennedy made his famous speech to Congress. "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out, landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." The challenge took approximately 400,000 engineers, scientists, and technicians, and more than 20,000 companies and universities. Huge amount of effort to be able to do this. NASA had only 15 minutes of experience with being in space with the Explorer 1, which was really an unmanned probe that was out there collecting data and testing communications equipment for NASA. And this happened only a couple days before John F. Kennedy had given this speech. Space exploration was still science fiction, and we had not created any of the tools to put a man on the moon on the day of the speech on May 25th, 1961. We've seen similar challenges in history, and as we look through the book, Columbus accepted this challenge. He sailed from Palos using only dead reckoning navigation. Charles Lindbergh did the same, flying from New York to Paris, in which many Frenchmen were surprised to see that he had made it. Approximately 40 years later, from 1927, we were taking flights from New York to Paris 24 hours a day. They had about 13 flights, taking approximately 6 hours. And now we have thousands of flights all over the world. We don't even really think about getting on an airplane and flying to anywhere in the world. Neil Armstrong was born on August 5th, 1930, in Wapakoneta, Ohio. He is the oldest of 3 children. He has a sister, June, and brother, Dean. His parents are Stephen and Viola Armstrong. Viola stated, "In my heart, I dedicated him to God and promised I would do my best to rear him according to God's holy word." Viola Armstrong. He was certainly raised in a strong Christian household, and Christian values were put and really had an impact on Neil's life. At 9 years old, he had his first job cutting grass at a local cemetery. Most small U.S. towns were still coming out of the Depression during this era, and most of the young boys did go to work. However, Neil loved books. He wasn't really someone to do gritty work per se, though he liked building airplanes and aircraft design. He said, "I believe every human has a finite number of heartbeats available to him, and I don't intend to waste mine on running and doing exercises." I think that changed, though, in Apollo 11 when they started training for the astronaut program. They had to be in very good shape. His first airplane ride was with his father, and by 9 he was building model airplanes. This is a really good perspective from Neil in 1970 from his book, and I would like to read it to you. By the time I was 9, I was building model airplanes. They had become, I suppose, almost an obsession with me. People talk a lot about the Depression, about deprivation. They miss the point. People in the Depression, the parents, the children, lived with the lack of money. It wasn't an oppressive thing. You didn't think about it. It simply never occurred to you to be extravagant. I bought airplane models without engines because it never occurred to me to buy models with engines. I bought and I built rubber band powered models. I didn't feel put upon in any sense. I knew that's what I could afford, and I was very happy with it. Certainly content growing up, even in the Depression era. Neil received his pilot's license on August 5, 1946, his 16th birthday, though he had yet to receive a driver's license. Applied to the Navy as a way to get to college. That's really how a lot of young men went to college in those days, because the Navy, the armed services, helped pay for it. He went to Purdue University and studied aeronautical engineering, served in the Korean War, flying fighter aircraft, and then went back after the Korean War and finished his aeronautical engineering degree and went on to Edwards, California to become a test pilot for Air Force and NASA, and had 3 children, Ricky, Karen, and Mark, after marrying Janet. While a test pilot in California, he was active in his local Methodist church. He also led a Boy Scout group, and Reverend Butchart, unlike many Christians I had met, I had never heard Neil once utter a profanity, is quoted as saying. And I think this was probably a large testament because he was a military man. Fortunately, while Neil was at Edwards, they lost a daughter, Karen, of only 3 years old. She had a falling accident while playing with her brother and died of a brain aneurysm. Shortly after that, he was selected for the Apollo program, and he would be the first man on the moon in almost 7 years. Apollo 11 crew consisted of Neil Armstrong, commander, the pilot, Buzz Aldrin, systems manager, Mike Collins, command and service module pilot. They went through a grueling training program, and on July 16, 1969, Apollo was launched from Cape Canaveral from Launch Pad 39A. There already was a problem as soon as it launched. You look in the left picture, the rocket is actually at a slight angle. The NASA engineers knew that there could be possible heavy winds during this day, and they built into the flight computer to compensate for a new trajectory. So instead of the aircraft trying to push against the wind and possibly breaking the spacecraft up, it would just predict a new trajectory of where it needed to go. Extremely innovative. In less than 3 minutes, they had burned as much fuel as a flight from New York to Paris. The rest of the flight was pretty well executed until they got what's called a 1202 alarm. The lunar module was looking for radar information, and the computer said, hey, I want this radar information. You're not giving it to me, so I'm going to keep broadcasting this alarm until you give it to me. Neil knew about this from his training and simulation. He took manual control and landed on the moon. Aldrin said, contact light, engine stop, engine arm off. Armstrong's, one of his famous quotes, tranquility base here, the Eagle has landed. On July 20th, 1969, approximately 9:56 p.m., history is certainly made. Everyone in the world is watching TV or listening on the radio. I'm not sure if there will probably be another time like this. You could possibly say 9/11, but a different type of event than this. Even communist countries and countries not friendly to the U.S. called to congratulate. And his famous quote is, one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. Neil's post-life, he was certainly a celebrity after the Apollo program. He chose to go back to Ohio and teach at the University of Cincinnati. This is what he wanted to do, but his celebrity status continued to bog him down. He eventually went and spoke for Chrysler Corporation. He joined Thiokol after the Challenger accident, the space shuttle, and he did not certainly live that life without struggles and disappointments. Unfortunately, he and his first wife, Janet, divorced in 1994. Excuse me. He really later did remarry a widowed woman named Carol later in the 1990s, early 2000s. He continued to serve on charitable boards and NASA boards until completely retiring in 2000, and then became a frequent speaker at Ohio area schools, and specifically at high school and elementary education programs there locally in the state of Ohio. A few things to point out as I look through Neil's life and that of a lot of the various astronauts as I was researching this. A lot to be said about servant leadership. Chris Kraft, manager, there were a lot of managers in the room when they were getting ready to do this, and they said it for the one time, hey, he said to his boss, "You're making me nervous. You need to cool it." So one of the engineers actually kicked his boss out of the room. And Gene Kranz, who's the mission director, said this is one of the few times where you can actually tell your boss to cool it. But the managers understood what was happening. Another one did not see Neil argue. Remembers NASA mission flight director Eugene Kranz. He had the commander mentality and didn't have to get angry. He also quoted as stating, "My work is dependent on many people. When you depend on others, you want to be able to trust them. And they want to be able to feel the same about you. Your words should always be beyond question." Educational impacts. The Apollo space program cost around $24 billion at this time. Many ask why we were using this money on a space program and not on foreign aid or helping build schools or hospitals, and certainly a good question to ask. The Chamber of Commerce, however, said the space program did more to bring states out of the Depression era and into the 20th century, probably far more than any other social program. Many say the space program was one of the best events to happen for education from both a financial perspective and psychological perspective. Prior to 1957, Admiral Rickover was really a lone voice crying for more emphasis on education and educational funding. But after the moon landing, education became a #1 priority across the nation in school systems and with Congress and with the United States government. Some benefits of Apollo, some of you might be aware of these: a microwave oven, cordless cellular phones, lasers, MRIs, the list goes on, GPS, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, huge amount of technological advancements from NASA and the Apollo programs. This is an interesting one I pulled from the National Science Foundation. And you can see here on the left the amount of science and engineering we have in 1960. Approximately 1 million. We almost grow through another 1 million just based off the space program from 1960 to 1970. You can see the other spikes in 1990 and 2000, and then we kind of have trailed off lately, and that's due to the internet boom and the smaller electronics, flat screens, and cell phone booms. A few Christian impacts. Never saw Neil argue. Buzz Aldrin was a church elder. He always carried a prayer with him that said, "The light of God surrounds me, the love of God enfolds me, the power of God protects me, the presence of God watches over me." Aldrin and Armstrong both did conduct communion on the moon. Aldrin requested radio silence and read John 15:5, "Whoever abides in me will bring forth much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Another thing to see is Apollo 15, James Irwin, after he walked on the moon in August of 1971, actually became a minister. A few last words. Neil Armstrong was quoted as saying he went to the Israel, and Jesus was talking to Ben Dov, who was a guide there, and he said, "Ask him." So Jesus stepped right here. Armstrong asked, "That's right." To which Armstrong replied, "I have to tell you, I'm more excited stepping on these stones than I was stepping on the moon." So secular world remembers Armstrong for a lot of various things, but his family is quoted as remembering him as a strong man of faith. And this is his final letter and speech. One of his things he said in his letter I'd like to read to you, and then I'll show you the speech and we'll be done. "There is much uncertainty to life. Good health may be taken away from you without warning. Material possessions may be lost due to circumstances beyond your control. The one thing that cannot be taken from you without your consent is your character, which includes your beliefs, your ethics, and your principles. So guard them with care. They are your most valuable possessions."
It was the ultimate peaceful competition, USA versus USSR. I'll not assert that it was a diversion which prevented a war. Nonetheless, it was a diversion. It was intense, and it did allow to both sides to take the high road with the objectives of science and learning and exploration. Eventually, it provided a mechanism for engendering cooperation between former adversaries. In that sense, among others, it was an exceptional national investment for both sides.